What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports. If you're watching our college football channel, it's time for the Week 6 playoff eliminator as we head into Week 6 of the 2022 college football season. Several new eliminations this week and a playoff bracket picture that looks really more like what we expected to see in the preseason. As we get further into the season, instead of it getting more and more different, it's starting to look more and more like we thought it would, which is interesting. Here are the teams that were already eliminated coming into this week. We talked about some of these teams like Florida, maybe even Texas with 2 losses that could potentially come back from the dead. We're not really going to even acknowledge that though until we get to November. If there's a 2-loss team in November, it looks like there's a path for them, a realistic path, we might bring them back from the dead. But right now, I think any 2-loss team you can go ahead and say is eliminated, unless we get some chaos. So these teams already were eliminated. Now let's look at the new eliminations following Week 5. We've got Arkansas. They lose to Alabama, their second loss. Auburn loses to LSU, a game that really had a great chance to win. Baylor losing to Oklahoma State. Now you kind of wish you hadn't scheduled BYU in the non-conference, because then they would only have 1 loss. Cal with their second loss. Indiana, yes, I realized I had a typo there on California. Indiana, they lose their second game. Iowa lose their second game. Iowa State, they lost to Kansas. They're now out of it. Oklahoma, man, they got blown out by TCU. They are out of it. Oregon State loses their second game in a row. Pittsburgh losing to Georgia Tech. That was a big surprise there. Just didn't see that one coming. And, I thought Pitt was maybe poised to make a run to get back into the playoff conversation potentially and win the Coastal Division, especially after Miami has been struggling. But they did not play well at all against Georgia Tech, and they lose. Rutgers blown out by Ohio State. They're now out of it. Texas A&M eliminated. They've lost to App State and Mississippi State. So yeah, they're done. Texas Tech also eliminated after they lost to Kansas State, their second loss of the season. So new eliminations, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13 eliminations this week. 13 eliminations, as it's going to go quick. Now that we get into conference play, you're going to see teams get eliminated, and we're going to see this field really in the next couple of weeks. It's going to get narrowed down big time. We're going to have just a handful of teams that really have a real shot at making the playoff. Still a lot of teams in the race right now, though. Let's go to those 1-loss teams. BYU, Duke, technically I think still in it, but it's be hard for a team like Duke. Florida State, they'll have a chance against Clemson. They can overcome this loss to Wake Forest and possibly get into the playoff conversation. Illinois only has 1 loss. It would take a lot. They'd have to win the division, and then probably beat Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship. So yeah, Duke, Illinois, probably not going to make it. I did put all the 1-loss teams into one graphic here. We had been kind of separating them on the more realistic teams. Kansas State, is Kansas State alive? If they win out, they win the Big 12, but they have a loss to Tulane. I don't know. I think they're alive, but I don't think they control their own destiny. Kentucky, they can definitely bounce back if they were able to win the SEC. Unlikely, but it's possible. LSU, kind of the same story there. Maryland lose with the 1 loss to Michigan. They're still alive. Minnesota still could win the Big Ten potentially. Mississippi State, only 1 loss. NC State losing this weekend to Clemson. It's going to be tough for them because they now need Clemson to lose 2 games in order for NC State to make it to the ACC Championship. North Carolina still with just that 1 loss. Oregon, just the 1 loss to Georgia. Oregon and Utah both losing in Week 1, but they have both looked really good since then. Washington had that loss this weekend at UCLA on the road, but they still, if they went out, they could get back into that conversation. Same thing with Washington State. And Wake Forest is in the same boat as NC State. The problem is they're going to need Clemson to lose 2 games in order for them to go to the ACC Championship. And the way Clemson's playing right now, I don't really see that happening. I mean, you've got Syracuse, Miami, Florida State, Notre Dame. Those are going to be the 4 games that might possibly be a challenge for Clemson. I don't see them losing 2 of those 4 games. I mean, maybe they lose 1, but I don't see them losing 2. So I think Wake Forest and NC State, they're not eliminated, but it's going to be very hard for them. They're going to need a lot of help, and some of these teams need more help than others. When we get to a certain point, we'll kind of divide this up with the 1-loss teams that control their own destiny and the 1-loss teams that need some help. For example, I think Florida State probably controls their own destiny. If they win out, they beat Clemson, They go to the ACC Championship. They'll need a little bit of help because they'll need Wake Forest to lose one time, but that's not a ton of help. Kentucky, on the other hand, they control their own destiny for sure. If they win out, they're going to be in. Kansas State, I just talked about, I don't know if they would be in. So we'll start to kind of look at the teams that control their own destiny versus the teams that need some help. Now, once we get this field narrowed down just a little bit more. Okay, so how about the teams that are still undefeated? And I realize James Madison and Coastal Carolina are not on here, but we're talking about teams that have a chance. Those teams have been eliminated just because of their schedule, so they have no chance, and that's why they're not on this graphic. Alabama's still undefeated. Clemson, Georgia. There is Kansas. Kansas and Syracuse, I'd say the two biggest surprises as far as teams that are undefeated. Michigan and Ohio State, no surprise there. Oklahoma State, big win over Baylor. They are still undefeated. Ole Miss with a big win over Kentucky, still undefeated. Penn State still sitting there undefeated. I just talked about Syracuse. TCU, huge win over Oklahoma. They blow them out. They're still undefeated. Tennessee undefeated. They got a big game with LSU coming up. UCLA undefeated at 5-0 with a big win over Washington. And USC, maybe not quite as impressive these last couple of games, but they're still undefeated, and everything's still right there in front of them. If they win out, it will be hard for them to be kept out of the playoff. And so as long as they win, I don't think they have to be super impressive. They just have to win. So these teams still undefeated. Let's take a look at the playoff bracket and just look at what the picture is looking like now. Not my predictions. I always do my predictions later on in the week, probably Thursday. But this is just the playoff picture based off of where the teams are now, and then just kind of if all the favorites went out, if everything goes how it's expected to go, we don't see a bunch of upsets, this is what the playoff picture looks like. I think Alabama can be moved back to that one spot. They are looking better than Georgia right now. But Georgia, I think, still in this thing. So Alabama at 1 and Georgia at 3. Georgia still is going to be, I know they didn't look great against Missouri, but they're still going to be favored, I think, in the rest of their games. But they'll have some tough ones. Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, those will be tough games for Georgia. It's possible they could trip up, and if they lose a game, the same thing with Alabama or Georgia. If one of them loses a regular season game and then they lose again in the SEC championship, they're not going to the college football playoff unless we see just a bunch of 2-loss teams in the running. So yeah, the loser, whoever loses the SEC championship's got to go undefeated. So there is pressure on those two teams. But the way if they win out, I think right now Alabama would be favored over Georgia in the SEC championship, and that's why I have them at 1 and Georgia at 3. Ohio State at 2. They're still the favorites in the Big Ten. I don't think we've seen anything to change our minds on that. And then we go to that 4 spot. I know you Penn State fans, they want to be on this line. I don't think I'm quite ready to put them there yet. Michigan still, I think, is going to be favored in that game. And so Michigan, Penn State's going to be an underdog against Michigan and against Ohio State. And because of that, they're not on this number 4 spot. USC going to be favored in every game that they play except maybe Utah. So they're here. Clemson going to be favored in the rest of their games. Oklahoma State, I think, probably now becomes the favorite in the Big 12. So they're also on that number 4 line. Penn State, though, not far behind. If they beat Michigan, Penn State obviously would take their place. But yeah, this is what the playoff picture is looking like right now. Will we see a surprise team emerge? Will one of these teams fall off? We'll find out over the next few weeks. I think October will be a fun month in college football. We'd love to get your thoughts on the playoff picture. How do you see it playing out? Let me know what you think about just everything that's happened and all the teams. Like Oklahoma is already out of it. Texas A&M already out of it. Big surprises already this season, and I think we'll see a lot more as we, again, go through the month of October. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more here on the SG1 Sports College Football Channel.